Today, I'm going to share with you something that we've all experienced at one point or another. Failure. I spent over 15 years of my life addicted to failure. This was exemplified when I was sitting in jail facing over 20 years in prison. And one day in jail, another inmate said, "You've got to ask yourself, are you about this life?" And that statement would spark a 5-year journey into me utilizing my massive list of failures to reinvent myself. And looking back on my journey, I was able to identify 3 key steps which helped me along the way. Reflection with acceptance, accountability, and action. That inmate's statement continued to weigh on me as my time progressed in jail. I would lay awake at night in my cell, replaying that question. Am I about this life? Do I want the next 30 years to be filled with prison stints, crippling drug addiction, and lost relationships? Or maybe there's a better option. I found myself reflecting back on all the moments that led me to where I was. And for the first time, I was able to see who I really was. And I was trash. Reflection has this weird ability to put everything into perspective, but only if you're honest with yourself. When entering the reflection process, we need to have an objective mindset and look at all the situations, big and small, where we harbor feelings of anger or resentment. We need to do this because when we're in the moment, we tend to have this instinctual reaction to what is going on. We want to defend ourselves and justify our actions. There's a control aspect here as well, because it is very frustrating trying to change something or someone we have no control over. When reflecting on something, we need to think of it as an analogy of a hula hoop to help remind us what we do and do not have control over. Imagine you were holding this sparkly unicorn hula hoop, the last one available at the store due to my procrastination, which I'll most likely reflect on later. But imagine you were holding this over your head. If you were to let it go, it creates this boundary around you and everything else. Now, everything inside the hula hoop, you have control over. And everything outside of it, you don't. Using this analogy will help you sort out what belongs to you and what belongs to someone else. Acceptance is inextricably linked to the reflection process because they occur almost simultaneously. Most would assume that acceptance means we consent, we're okay with something, when in fact, it can mean quite the opposite. Acceptance can also mean that we're not okay with it. When applying this definition to our part in past events, it specifically means we are not okay with our actions and allows us to determine what we are going to do about it. When reflecting and identifying these prior events and our role in them, we're also coming to terms with the realities of our life and deciding we are not okay with the part we played. Now, we're provided a choice in how to respond. Acceptance helps drive action in our growth from our failures. And it is truly empowering when you're provided a choice in your life. Now, in this first step, we have identified the role we've played in various moments throughout our lives. But now we have to do something about it, which leads us to accountability. This was the hardest step during my journey. About a year after being released from jail, I received a message from my ex-wife. It had been almost 2 years since I'd seen or spoken to her, our daughter. And this was a long, message. It was filled with years of pain, grief, and resentment masked as anger. And to be honest with you, everything directed at me in this message was deserved. I was a manipulative, deceitful, poor excuse of a father and husband. I had already reflected and accepted this part of my past, and yet my gut reaction was to justify and defend myself, find any minute inaccuracy in her story to hurl back at her, while ignoring the true point of the message. It was very hard trying to take accountability in that moment. That's what distinguishes this step from the previous one. Accountability is verbal ownership of our actions and not justifying them or blaming others. Being honest with yourself and someone else means you're taking steps to change your thinking patterns, habits, and behaviors. And by bringing another person into the fold, you're creating an additional barrier to reverting back to your old ways of thinking, because they can help hold you accountable as you continue to grow. And you can do this with anyone that you trust: friend, family member, spiritual guide, counselor, as long as they are able to help you reframe your thought process and guide you towards an honest response. Accountability has another benefit on our journey towards growth. It refocuses us back on what's inside our hula hoop, what we have control over. When we take accountability for the inside of our hula hoop, we focus only on what we can change and relinquish our emotional and mental investment in what we can't. During my interaction with my ex-wife, I leaned heavily on my recovery sponsor to help me take accountability and respond. I was able to be objective and take full ownership of my actions and my response. Yes, I was all of those things you described. I was manipulative and deceitful. I was scared and weak. I abandoned my daughter and chose drugs instead. I'm sorry for the person I was and the things I did. And I'm not that person anymore. And if given the opportunity, I'll prove that with my actions. And action is a beautiful thing. My action began when I entered recovery after getting out of jail. I would attend 12-step meetings and outpatient treatment, which helped me identify and implement this process. By following the 12 steps, I was able to take a personal inventory of what I had control over, my hula hoop, and identify what areas needed improvement. My peers were my greatest resource. I would observe them, and if they had a quality or characteristic that I wanted to emulate, I'd reach out to them, question them. How do you do it? What's your process? Then I would focus on one or two areas and set goals to implement and practice these processes. This is what action is all about. You have to identify what needs improvement. Is it something you can change? Is it inside your hula hoop? Ask yourself, what are my barriers? What are my resources? After you've answered those questions, learn what you can implement in order to grow. Then make a plan and commitment to go about doing it. You may not notice at first that you're being more compassionate or honest with others, but as you continue to grow and improve, the outcomes will be immeasurable. You will notice the types of people you attract to your life are beneficial rather than detrimental. That the way others perceive you and your character will change. And that all of the life goals you used to measure your success on will come naturally because your new measure of success is a better you. I described action as beautiful in reference to what comes with it, the new bonds and relationships that have been created. Russell Brand discusses an idea in his book, Freedom from Our Addictions, in which he describes recovery as connection and complacency as isolation. The same holds true for what we're talking about here. Growth is connection to ourselves and those around us, while complacency is isolation. You gain this connection through the action stage by using your family, peers, counselor to help you gain insight on how to grow and improve. This process is a continuum, which makes sense because none of us are perfect. You reflect on your past, accepting situations for what they are. Identify which behaviors belong inside your hula hoop. Take accountability for your actions and put a plan in place to grow. It's been almost 5 years since I last used, and the biggest truth that I have learned is yes, I had a problem with drugs and alcohol, but my bigger problem was me. Refusing to learn, refusing to grow, not identifying what aspects of my life were within my control and doing something about it. I went from facing over 20 years in prison, losing contact with my daughter for years, failed relationships, and generally only caring about my own self-interest to where I am now. Today, I'm heavily involved in community outreach programs where I volunteer my time to spread awareness about addiction and help individuals find resources for recovery. I hold several leadership positions on campus where I help students attain the skills necessary to be both academically and personally successful. My relationship with my daughter has grown stronger than before as I've regained the trust of both her and her mother. And my personal life is the most stable it has ever been as I'm engaged to an amazing woman and have 2 mostly wonderful children. 5 years ago, none of these titles or statements would have been used to describe me. They couldn't, due to my inability to take personal responsibility for what I had control over and implement personal growth. And if this process can bring me from a life of disappointment and despair to who you see now, just imagine what it can do for you.